Section 4. The Division of the Virtues. Hume's Intentions. For an adequate understanding of Hume's division of the virtues into the natural and artificial, it is not enough merely to spell out the explicit features of the distinction. Rather, it is necessary to ask why he thought the distinction important, and also what impact he intended or hoped his distinction would have on his readers. The two questions are not unrelated, since they focus on different aspects of the same general rule, the nature of Hume's intentions. Explaining these intentions is crucial if the general outlines of his philosophy, and Book 3 of the Treatise in particular, are not to be misunderstood. So, this section will address two issues which help throw light on Hume's intentions in moral philosophy. The first requires only a brief treatment, because it poses in a general way a problem which will be considered in more detail in the next section. It is the question of somewhat curious structure of Book 3 itself. The issue is best indicated by summarizing the subdivisions of the text and the topics covered there. It is also best explained by clarifying the reasons for the structure being as it is. In Part 1, entitled Of Virtue and Vice in General, it is argued that moral distinctions derive not from reason, but from a moral sense. The first of the two sections rehearses a set of arguments against the ethical rationalists, including, for example, Samuel Clarke and William Wollaston, all of whom explained moral goodness in terms of conformity with some abstract rational relation. This section concludes with an observation, which Hume admits he cannot forbear adding. The famous, and as I shall endeavor to show, in some respects undeservedly famous, the is-ought passage. The second section is quite surprising. It quickly reaches its main conclusion that because moral distinctions are perceptions, they are impressions rather than ideas, and that morality is therefore more properly felt than judged of. Immediately, it stresses how little is gained by this result. The in a manner infinite number and variety of our moral duties is itself sufficient to show this, since 'tis absurd to imagine that in every particular instance these sentiments are produced by an original quality and primary constitution. The supposition is absurd because it would render all moral education unnecessary by reducing moral behavior to the purely instinctive, and the absurdity is evidenced by the implication that we are pre-programmed to respond appropriately to the greatly diverse and variable situations which call for moral assessment and action. As Hume notes, this view also runs directly counter to the principles of simplicity championed by the experimental method. Such a method of proceeding is not conformable to the usual maxims by which nature is conducted, where a few principles produce all the variety we observe in the universe, and everything is carried on in the easiest and most simple manner. Consequently, the conclusion reached above, that morality derived from a moral sense, a primary impulse or constitution, is of rather little value. Rather, to explain moral notions successfully, 'tis necessary to abridge these primary impulses, and find some more general principles upon which all our notions of morals are founded. Hume proposes that these more general principles may be found in the designs and projects and views of men, since these are principles as necessary in their operation as heat and cold, moist and dry. Nature, since it is usual for us to set our own activities in opposition to the other principles of nature simply because they are our own, the fruit of our choices and actions, it follows that to locate general principles of morals in human activity is, in one sense at least, to deny them a natural foundation. Moral distinctions founded in human social practices can therefore be called artificial virtues. In Part 2, entitled Of Justice and Injustice, Hume's aim is to establish that many of our most established virtues are artificial in the sense outlined. These include justice, which first and foremost means abstaining from the property of others, promise-keeping, allegiance to government, laws of nation, international justice, and the characteristically female virtues of chastity and modesty. These virtues, because grounded in human social practices, have two important features. The first is that it is not individual acts, but the whole system of such acts that has value. The second is the central role of reason in the determination of these virtues, because the designs and projects and views of men all essentially involve the employment of reason. This intimate connection between reason and practical affairs leads Hume to stress the importance of reason even though it cannot found human practice. For this reason, when Hume returns in Part 3 to give an account of the natural virtues, the virtues founded purely and directly on a primary impulse, he devotes much of the opening section to stressing the greater practical importance of reason and the artificial virtues founded on it. It is by reason that we determined all the great lines of our duty. The insistence on the greater importance of reason in a work which begins by denying a rational foundation to its subject matter is unexpected, and is best explained by attributing a complex purpose to its author. The full complexity of this purpose will emerge below, but we can begin by attributing to Hume two aims. First of all, to show his colors on an issue that had generated much debate among his older contemporaries by plumping for the moral sense position against the rationalists, and secondly, to show that, whatever the original foundation of morals, reason plays a central role in settling many of the most important of the moral issues. He offers a compromise solution to the dispute between the moral sense school and the rationalists. Part 3 on the natural virtues seeks to achieve more limited goals. It is oversimplifying, however, to say, as Mackey does, that in Part 3 Hume turns to the natural virtues, having rather oddly dealt first with those aspects of morality which are the more puzzling for his general point of view, and only later coming to more straightforward matters. The procedure is not puzzling if Part 2 is the heart of Hume's account of morals, while Part 3 being more necessary for the sake of completeness, for rounding off the final part of a major treatise of human nature, than for any vital didactic purpose. Hume's overall plan for the treatise requires his contribution to moral philosophy to have the character of a complete system. His main purpose there is, in fact, to underline the argument of parts 1 and 2, to show that the virtues most necessary to society are not those virtues grounded in some primary impulse, however important those impulses are, but those generated by human beings through the non-metaphysical reasonings of everyday life. The most important virtues are those generated by rational artifice, the artificial virtues. Having sketched in the main outlines of the argument of Book 3 of the treatise, we can now address the second question concerning Hume's intentions. What impact, if any, did he seek to have on his readers by stressing that justice, fidelity, allegiance, and chastity, and modesty are all artificial? In the opinion of the 1745 pamphlet referred to above, he had sapped the foundations of morality and had denied the natural and essential difference betwixt right and wrong. Was this reaction in any sense sought? Selby Bigg, in his introduction to the Enquiries, has no doubts. He says that there in the treatise he insisted vigorously, though not very intelligibly, that justice was not a natural but only an artificial virtue, and it is pretty plain that he meant to be offensive in doing so. Only a casual observation is offered in support of this claim, but some further reasons can be given in its support, especially when it is remembered that the allegedly female virtues of chastity and modesty are among the artificial virtues. To show why the classification of these virtues should be particular cause for concern, especially for the contemporary reader, one characteristic feature of the artificial virtues is especially important. It is that the value of the artificial virtues resides in the whole, not in the individual parts, a feature Hume explicitly discusses when considering the case of justice. It is the same basic issue that addressed by Hutcheson under the heading of external rights, but the problem is particularly sharp when couched in characteristic Humean fashion as a problem of motivation. Hume stresses that although the whole system of justice is beneficial to society, a single act of justice is frequently contrary to public interest, and may in itself be very prejudicial to society. The examples he offers, such as that of a beneficent man who restores a fortune to its rightful owner, a miser or seditious bigot, has acted justly and laudably, but the public is a real sufferer, clearly show the Hutchisonian connection. But Hume draws a disturbing moral. If justice or any other artificial virtue, depending for its value not on the effects of each virtuous act, but only on the mutual assistance and combination of its corresponding parts, there seems to be no reason to be more virtuous than the next man or woman. Certainly, there is no reason for the conscientious pursuit of such virtues, at least in the strong sense of pursuing virtue whatever the circumstances. The practice of artificial virtues is a conditional matter. If this is granted, the consequences for the female virtue of chastity seem particularly dire because, in sharp contrast to the central artificial virtues of justice and allegiance, violations of chastity have both a constant motive in natural pleasure as well as an ease of opportunity. Adding to these attractions, a theory of virtue in which no value is located in each particular instance of chastity is to run the risk of misleading the incautious reader, and therefore also to create an environment particularly encouraging to the libertine. This is unlikely to have been lost on Hume's male readers, all of whom would have had cause for anxiety about the implications, for their households, of a doctrine that could be taken, even if mistakenly, to excuse individual licentiousness. Could Hume himself have feared suspicion on this score? He was well known for his enjoyment of female company. Could it be significant that in his short autobiography he should mention that it was in the company of modest women that he took a particular pleasure? These observations show how Hume could have offended some of his readers, but not that any offense taken was reasonable. Whether he actively sought to offend is yet a further question. It seems likely that the youthful author of the treatise, in labeling the relevant virtues artificial, sought to be provocative, but quite unlikely that he sought to offend. His subsequent treatments of the issue suggest a man anxious to allay public suspicions. The implication is that in the treatise he failed fully to appreciate the strength of the public reaction, and, his fingers having been once burnt, he subsequently took great care to avoid repeating offense. Before turning to consider the various formulations of the distinction, it is necessary to clear away one possible source of misunderstanding. Hume's attempt to account for the origins of justice without appealing to divine purposes, etc., cannot itself be judged a source of offense. Hutcheson had already argued that by appealing only to the constitution of our nature, more particularly to our moral sense, the law of nature could be determined without reference to any law, whether human or divine. And this view is itself new only in its details. In general outline, it is simply the rationalist version of natural law as developed by Grotius, Suarez, and others, and encapsulated in Grotius's Etiamsi Daremus passage. Although it was not a position that enjoyed widespread support, it seems quite fanciful to imagine that advocating such a familiar position could be considered offensive. It may be thought that, in one crucial respect, the positions of Grotius and Hutcheson are quite different from Hume's, since they both accord at least some recognition to the divine will. Neither denies God's existence, nor his concern for human affairs. However, Hume's position on these issues is a good deal more difficult to determine than is often supposed. Developing a system of morals in which God plays no part need not be seen as a problem, even from a theist point of view. It may rather be taken as evidence of a more complete theory. For appeals to divine activity may principally be occasioned by the need to paper over cracks in the moral edifice. God will therefore be absent, but not denied, in any account of the natural moral order, if the constitution of nature is indeed a fully interlocking system capable of harmonious functioning without relying on the cosmic repair man. So, as long as the divine existence is not denied, a theory of natural morals will imply no irreligious conclusions by failing to allocate a special divine role. In fact, the extent to which it avoids a role for special divine action will be directly proportionate to its conception of the efficacy of original divine creative act. How does this bear on Hume? Interestingly, although it is difficult to interpret his views on these questions, there is evidence that he held to the sort of view outlined above. Although his moral theory very largely avoids any reference to a divine being, and especially to any divine role in morals, this is not because the existence of a deity is denied outright. In fact, in one place he clearly acknowledges the existence of a divine being, allocating to him an overarching, constituting role. This is towards the end of the first of the appendices in the second inquiry. The standards of morals, he says, arising from the internal frame and constitution of animals, is ultimately derived from that supreme will, which bestowed on each being its peculiar nature and arranged the several classes and orders of existence. This is exactly Grotius's view, so the conclusion seems irresistible that, whether or not Hume's views offended his contemporaries, there is no sound basis for regarding them, as does Selby Bigg, as deliberately offensive. Hume's position is, at bottom, a commonplace of natural law, that justice arises from or reflects the requirements of human sociability. The rules of justice are necessary for the establishment of a social order which, as Grotius puts it, is consonant with human intelligence.